Welcome everyone. I'll just kick it off here with, here's just some information. This will be in the slide deck for you, but some links to some other white papers and some of the other recordings that have previously gone out. They're all available on SCN, so please take a look at these links after the fact. And we'll just go over a quick overview of the agenda that we'll be covering today. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction of who I am and a little bit about my background. And then we're going to just dive right into the best practices that I've laid out here today. So we'll start with sort of some high-level process best practices. These are some of the supporting workflows that surround the WebIntelligence product. Then we'll dive into semantic layer best practices. This will be some stuff you can take a look at the semantic layer universe level or the BigQuery level. Or BigQuery rather. We'll dive into some report design stuff, and then we'll talk a little bit about query and calculation best practices as well, and then dive into some sizing stuff as well. So without further ado, I've got a lot of content, so I want to make sure I get through it. So I'm gonna just dive right in here. Myself, as Jan had mentioned, name's Jonathan Brown. Most people actually around here, and I find customers as well, are referring to me as JB, so that's kind of my nickname, I guess. So I'm good with Jonathan or JB, whatever you guys want. And I've been with SAP now for just over 15 years. Actually, it'll be 16 in August. So it's been around a while. I've seen a lot of different customer environments and a lot of different reports at this point. So I draw from that for my content here. And most of that time has been spent actually in the business intelligence realm. So supporting things like InfoView and BI Launchpad, and even way back to Seagate Info, which was one of the original, I guess, BI platforms that we had. And my current role is called the Support Architect, which means I work a lot with our development team to ensure that customers' needs are being met and they're actually being delivered to our developers. So I'm working with them to help make sure they understand the customer's perspective when they're designing and resolving defects in our product. And really my passion is around Webi performance and stability. So a lot of the best practices you'll see today will really be around, providing a supportable system that is stable and fast performing. So that's really the focus of most of these best practices today. So we'll dive into some process best practices. So the first one that I have today is, probably not new to most of you, but it still surprises me when I'm working with customers how few of them really take advantage of the scheduling features to the fullest. For me, the rule of thumb is really if a report takes more than 5 minutes to run on demand, then really that report should be scheduled. And of course, this has lots of different benefits. Not too many people nowadays want to sit around and watch a screen for 5 minutes while they wait for a report to come up. So scheduling gives you that option to kind of set it and forget it, and then either be emailed or come back to it after a short period of time and be able to instantly view a report. And another option that I don't see people use as often when scheduling documents is this retry option, and I think that's mainly because it's hidden away in the CMC. But you can set up your schedules to retry if they were to fail for whatever reason. A common reason for a failure might be the database was having issues at the time the report was supposed to run, and maybe it couldn't fetch the data, so it failed. But with scheduling, you can offload the processing of your documents to kind of non-peak times, like during the evening, which can reduce the impact to your database during the daytime when people are on there and maybe doing some ad hoc querying. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but you can also utilize the instances for report linking for faster workflows in the future. So instances can be used with report linking is basically the point there. So on to the next best practice. utilizing instance limits to reduce your total instance and object count. So this one here, I mean, it's not something we think about too often, but instances can get kind of run away on you. If you have, especially if you have users out there that can set their own recurring schedules. So what ends up happening is the CMS ends up getting hundreds of thousands of objects basically that it has to deal with, and instance limits can help reduce that the impact of that by setting either like a global or a folder level instance limit. So when you set an instance limit, you can say maybe only keep the last 10 instances, and that's going to help reduce the amount of objects that the CMS has to deal with. So of course the benefits of that, it can improve the cache hit rates because the CMS can only keep so many objects in memory. So reducing the overall number of instances that it has to deal with actually improves your chances of that object that you need to query for being already loaded in the CMS cache. And this can, of course, give you faster navigation through BI Launchpad and InfoView, as it'll, have everything it needs basically in memory. And for overhead, less manual cleanup later on. It's the worst thing you can do is find a folder later on that has, 100,000 instances in it. It takes 5 minutes to load, and then you have to manually go in there and figure out which ones you can clean up. So here's another one, platform search tweaking. So this was one that hit us pretty hard when 4.0 first dropped. In support at least, platform search was a new feature. Some of you may be aware of what it does behind the scenes, but yeah, so what it does is basically crawls through all of the content in your system, and it creates an index that helps the search within BI Launchpad, execute a search faster. Unfortunately, by default, it's set to continuous crawl, and the level of detail that it tries to index is actually metadata, meaning it actually goes into the reports and indexes information contained within the reports and universes. So that, especially like if you were to all of a sudden import, a couple thousand Webi reports from maybe an older system into a newer system, well, platform search is going to go out there and try and index those as soon as they hit the system. So what we had was a number of customers, see a huge impact on the resources on their system as this platform search started to turn through all those instances, especially relevant after an upgrade or a migration. So there are options. You can go in there. You can actually, rather than doing a continuous crawl, you can set it to do it on a scheduled basis. So again, you can schedule it to be when users aren't on the system, and that's gonna lower the impact on your Webi processing servers and allow your on-demand and instance viewing to execute much quicker. And timeouts. So out of the box, most of our timeouts are set to around a 20-minute mark, which means, if you go and you view a report, maybe you're on page 1, you go grab a coffee, you come back 5 minutes later, your session's still there, you can continue to work, flip to the next page. But especially when you're developing reports and stuff, quite often we'll want to increase those timeouts. And I see that a lot of the customers I work with have set that up to about 60 minutes. So there are a number of timeouts. Really, it's about striking a balance with your timeouts to make sure that your end users are, getting the experience they want. But you just have to keep in mind that when you increase these timeouts, you're, increasing the resources that are going to be needed on your system to handle and manage those sessions as they stick around for a longer period of time. And where this becomes really obvious is on your application server. So quite often what we'll see is a Tomcat server that has many threads sitting out there that are either showing as hung or blocked, when really what those are sessions that nothing was happening on those sessions. Maybe somebody took a lunch break and they left their web browser open to a Webi report, and that's just basically sitting there consuming a thread on the app server. So really this is more of a sizing thing. If you are going to increase those timeouts, just make sure you account for it in your sizing. And I've got some links to some resources here on the right hand side. presentation will be available later today up on SCN, so you'll be able to follow these links. And this is just a note. I just wanted more to get information out there for people, but choose the right interface for your business needs. So with WebIntelligence, we have 3 different viewers that you can use. Webi Rich Client, which really is geared towards designers, people that are spending day in and day out designing reports, don't want to deal with timeouts, maybe want to leave it open for several days as they work on a report design. The Java Applet, this is for designers that are doing short little sprints of development work, or power users that want a little bit more functionality and be able to slice and dice up reports however they want. And then the HTML is really, it's designed to be the lightweight everyday report viewer, and with some filtering and even some design capabilities built into it. Eventually our goal is to get feature parity between these all and just have HTML as kind of a lightweight designer as well. But unfortunately, Java is a very rich interface that we've yet to find a way to duplicate everything in the HTML viewer. But we're working towards it. There is also the Webi user guide here. Section 1.3 covers all the different features, does a comparison matrix of these viewers, so you can help choose which one's best for you. So there, we'll dive into some semantic layer best practices next. So for the semantic layer ones and the query and calculation ones, I did reach out to a number of our developers here just to kind of ask them from a code perspective, what are some best practices for, design. So this one actually came from one of our developers. He says, he gets a lot of reports in for debugging or whatever, and he sees that, every dimension is merged that, is in there that can be merged essentially. And that's, partially probably because, auto merge dimensions is a popular feature, and so things get merged. And from a code perspective, though, that does add overhead onto your report. So if you do have dimensions that are merged within your document, and you're kind of at the later stages of your document's almost finalized, and you're not going to need the merged dimensions of certain dimensions, then you can right-click and choose the unmerge option, which is going to reduce the amount of work that the processing server has to do. So building smaller universes and queries. So really, I'm an advocate of starting with the business needs that you have, and choosing 1 or 2 max for a document or a query, or a universe for that matter. So by building smaller universes and queries, they're more manageable, they're easier to maintain and develop, hand over to colleagues in case you're changing positions. So really, creating large monster universes, it just adds a lot of overhead and can really lag on your performance. So, if you're working on a new, universe or query, really the best thing to do is keep it small as you can. And remember, you can always, use multiple data providers within a single document. So, really producing smaller universes and queries can really benefit you in the long run. And same applies for, BEX queries as well. I've seen a lot of customers that have spent so much time creating this one BEX query that will handle all of their needs. And meanwhile, it's just a pain to work with, or they're only using 10% of the functionality of that query in most of their documents, and yet they're paying for 100%. Moving on. So query stripping. This is an option that we've added in some of the newer versions of BI. And it's really what it does is it strips out objects that are not used in a document. It strips those out of the queries so that you have smaller queries that are optimized and will run quicker and return less rows. So this is turned on by default for BICS, BW queries, but it is not turned on by default for relational databases. So you just need to make sure that you have enabled these options so that you can take advantage of that for your relational data sources as well. And it can be enabled at the universe, query, and document level, so you just have to make sure that you have it checked on in all of those places to ensure you're taking advantage of it. This was actually a tip that came through from one of our customers on an SEN blog that I wrote. He says that he takes advantage of the join by SQL parameter quite often to help avoid multiple queries being generated and sent through to his database. So this is a parameter that you can enable at the universe level. That really during our SQL generation process, it will favor using a join within the SQL to combine queries rather than executing multiple and then having to combine those results or whatever outside of the SQL joins. So it's an option. It's a simple enough option to see it, check on, see if you benefit from it, and if not, the choice is yours. But definitely an option out there for you. And this one, it's pretty common practice out there, although, I have to keep it in here because this is really, from a support perspective, this is a huge one. And this is using the end SQL or even the begin SQL parameters within a universe to kind of comment on the SQL that's being sent through. So we have the @variable function that lets you put things like the document name, the business objects user, the universe name, allows you to put these things in comments within your SQL. And Dallas Marks has a great blog about this. It was originally written for older versions, but it applies just the same to newer versions. But what this allows you to do is, like, let's say your DBA is seeing a huge load on the database, and he can pull the SQL, from the database side that tells him, gives him the SQL, and quite often just linking the SQL back to a document or a user will be impossible. But by having it kind of inject these variables like the document name and the user and the universe into the SQL comments within it, the DBA would be able to pull it through and say, listen, this document's being run by this user from this universe, and it's killing the database. So I need you to go to that user and see what the heck he's doing. So from a supportability, best practices point of view, this is really a huge one. So we'll move on now to some report design best practices. So this is common sense, but really it's about creating some standard naming conventions for your documents and reports. So here's an example here, right? You maybe start with a short abbreviation for the department that the report is owned by, maybe a document sequence number of some sort, so it's easily referenceable by easy to remember numbers. Or maybe you have several revisions of a report and these numbers go up. Maybe that's a revision number for you. And then of course something with a bit of a description of what the report is. So the example here, HR 0001, all employees by region. This does tell us some stuff just by that document name. And again, if you're using that end SQL and @variable doc name, it will inject that into things like the SQL and could make it easier to trace back. And so the Webi documents should be named, with standard naming convention. Same with the report tabs contained within those documents. Really, I think most of us go here anyways, but just making sure that they're describing the content of that tab can help your users navigate through the documents and make sure that they're not clicking on a tab, and if it takes 30 seconds, they're not, having to click on that to find out what's contained within the tab, right? It should be descriptive enough that people can navigate through your document. And same goes with variables here. It can sometimes be difficult, especially in very large documents, to distinguish between variables and dimensions and measures. So common practice that I've seen out there is to prefix your variables with a V underscore so that they can easily be distinguished between other types of objects, right? So you can see here, I've just gone through and named my variables all with a V underscore in front of them. And this makes it very easy at a glance to see what's a variable and what's not. And this will also go when you're using these within formulas or other variables. It'll make them easier to trace back. So same goes with naming your cells and sections and blocks. As a document gets bigger and more complex, it can be really difficult to tell which table's which or what section is what. So just make a habit of naming your objects. It does take a little bit more time to do that, but it can save you and especially your colleagues if a document is being modified by multiple people. It can definitely save you some time in the long run. So I get a lot of customers that come through to support and they're having some issues because they've inherited a document. Somebody's moved on to another position or left the company, and they've inherited a document that might have taken 2 years to develop, and now they know really next to nothing about it. And so naming the sections and really developing a well-designed document can definitely help down the road for your company. And definitely for support as well, because quite often we'll be given a document to kind of work with for a customer, and we won't know much about it. But obviously, naming this stuff well helps us navigate through it from a support perspective as well. So this one came from our development group as well. So this is just something to keep in mind. We have functions, and most of them start with current, but basically there's current user, current date, current time, and these functions, what they do is they just display the user that's viewing the report, or the date that the report's being viewed, or the time, right, that the report's being viewed. And those can be helpful if it's like an official document and you need to have that documented if it was being printed or something like that. That can be helpful, but behind the scenes, what this can do is invalidate the cache files that you have on the back end. So if it's a shared document that multiple people are going to be viewing, what ends up happening is normally a document gets cached, and the Webi processing server will serve up a cached page, which can be a little bit quicker for the end users. But by using these current functions, essentially that page gets invalidated because it will always have to have new content, and it will skip the cache and have to go back and generate that page to include things like these current time, date, user. There's also a few more functions here like that revolve around the locale that can also do the same thing. So just keep that in mind. If you're designing a report, you might think, oh, it'll be really useful for me to have this in here, but at the end of the day, it might actually be causing a bit of a performance delay for your end users. So just evaluate whether it's really needed on your document, and that could save you and your users some time. And so use an About report tab to summarize your document. So we talked about naming conventions and everything, but this is essentially a report tab where you contain some holistic information around the document, such as the query summary, prompt summary, last execution date. These are predefined cells that you can drag and drop onto your report that will give you, the SQL that's being executed, the number of rows that are coming back, the prompt values that were selected, or the last time that document was executed. There's a number of other predefined cells as well you can include, But this is essentially just like a holistic snapshot of some of the metadata around the report that can really be helpful for a user that's trying to navigate your document, or for people that really want to know what's going on behind the scenes, such as support. So the About tab, it's also a great place for you to kind of flesh out your business needs and tell the end users, hey, this is the purpose of this document. It's meant to cover X, Y, Z, and maybe talk about the different report tabs that you have. This tab covers employees by region, and this one breaks it down to city, and allows you to actually flesh out what the report is and how to use it. So really the benefit of this, as a document grows, the About page can really help users navigate that more efficiently. And I've seen monster reports come through support, and some that take 30 to 60 seconds just to click on a report tab and then have it generate and view for the end user. So if I'm somebody that doesn't really know that report, I'm going to have a very bad experience if I'm having to click through those tabs and wait 30, 60 seconds for it to generate before I find out that it's not what I need, right? So having an About is kind of like a table of contents, or you can definitely build it out that way. Oh, report linking is a way to link documents using our open document calls. So open document is basically you can construct a URL that will allow you to launch a secondary report. Or if you have a portal, you can use it to launch reports from a portal, or integrate it into your current websites. But report linking within a document allows you to basically, almost like a drill down, launch another document with some parameters that were selected maybe from the main document. So a good example of this one here is, maybe I have a sales summary report, and that sales summary report just gives me my high level last year's revenue for my 10 stores. So I go to the summary report and I can see which stores did the best, which stores did the worst for the last year. Now, using report linking, I could provide links. Maybe I make the total, the summary, a hyperlink that then links to a details report using the store ID as a parameter that then would query and pull back all of the details, all the individual sales for that store. So it would allow me to create a document that only loaded the summary information and then only loaded the details information if I wanted it, right? And it would do that by launching a secondary document. So the opposite side of this is I create a monster sales document that has one tab that says summary, and then has either the ability to drill in within the document, or I have multiple report tabs that contain that details. And the problem with that is users that come in and are only interested in the summary information are still paying, as far as performance and resources go, they're still paying for all that detailed information, because behind the scenes Webi still has to deal with it, it still has to query for it. So really what you're doing here is with report linking, you're able to push delays off to those that really, only the people that really are interested in that. So this, of course, does mean a lot more time up front for your design, because you have to think about that and plan out your documents a little bit better. But yeah, I've seen some customers that use this really well, and they have very high performing systems because of it. So we link to Open Document. We've got a end user guide that helps you construct your own URLs, or the HTML viewer actually has a report linking wizard that will construct a URL for you and has a bit of a prettier interface that'll guide you through it. So limit the number of data providers you use. I've seen different numbers thrown out there, by different consultants. I think, 10 to 15 data providers is really kind of the average maximum that most people would recommend that you use. But really here, I just want to make sure that you guys understand behind the scenes, data providers are run in series. So essentially the time is stacked, one upon the other. Behind the scenes, we execute the first data provider. When that comes back, we execute the second one, execute the third one, fourth one, and that time all adds up to a total, contributes to the total runtime. So here in my example, we've got different size queries, obviously. Some run 20 seconds, 65 seconds, 6 seconds. The total runtime, 135 seconds. So really, that the time is stacked, and so the more data providers you have, obviously the more time that report could take. So there is, kind of a request in front of product right now to consider, finding a way to run these queries in parallel for future product versions, which could, help reduce that overall time. But in all of our current versions, this is the way it is, and you definitely want to keep that in mind when you're designing your reports. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, report linking can help kind of move that performance hit to be more of on demand. Or with report linking, you can link to an instance. So rather than having it query on demand, maybe you run a schedule every night that pre-fetches the data for popular things like, sales data or something transactional data. Essentially would cache it for you. So, and that can avoid the long run time during refresh. Great. So on to some query and calculation best practices. And I do apologize. I know I'm going quite fast through here. So the good news is most of these tips, if not all of them, are fleshed out in great detail in an SEN document that I've been putting together for the last 6 months. So, if you're not catching it all as I'm going right here, I do have, a lot more details around this, and the links further on in this document. So you guys will be able to come back and revisit most of this stuff. So, query filters versus report filters. So a query filter, this is a filter that you add in through the query panel. And these are appended to your where clause. So your SQL statement, will have a where clause in it that will limit the records that are requested from your database. So in essence, a query filter will reduce the amount of data that Webi has to process, but will also limit the amount of data that Webi has available to it at the time. So this will result in a faster document in most cases. Whereas a report filter, really what a report filter does is it just hides data that doesn't fit certain criteria. The data is still behind the scenes in the microcube. It's still being queried for and stored and dealt with. But you're going to pay for that. So if you do have the option of using a query filter versus a report filter, it is recommended. You can also create predefined filters at the semantic layer level, and those will make it easy for your report designers or the people consuming your reports to easily drag and drop filters that will apply at the semantic layer level and reduce the time that report could take. So aggregate and index awareness features. So these are set at the semantic layer. So these are some advanced features that let you basically take advantage of some database options that can greatly improve your performance if used correctly. So these do unfortunately require your database to have some stuff pre-configured. So this would be really during your design stages that you would want to take a look at these. But aggregate awareness allows you to use pre-aggregated data at your database level. So maybe your database aggregates last year's sales and just comes up with a summary for you. So if somebody does request a summary of last year's sales, it will just pull the one value from the database pre-aggregated for you, instead of having to pull in all of the individual sales records and aggregating it on the WebIntelligence side. This can obviously have some benefits. And same with the index awareness. This allows you to have specify index on your database side, and then essentially your report will be aware that an index already exists and can use that for faster querying, especially on things like strings that don't have indexes generally by default. So there's a lot more detail in our IDT guide, Information Design Tool Guide. So please check out the below sections if these are something you think you might benefit from. And here's another one right from the developers. So context operators are, basically like your in, for each, for all, your where. So these are often used within formulas and variables to, kind of give that variable context. So, into which it applies. So from a coding perspective, if you can use the in context versus the for each or for all, then that is more efficient on the back-end side to process using the in versus for each or for all. And same applies for using an if-then-else statement versus a where statement. So not in all cases are these going to be interchangeable, but if quite often when you're writing a formula, there's multiple ways to do it. So if you can, favor in and if-then-else, and that will generally run quicker from a processing perspective. And that's just, behind the scenes, the code is more complex for those other functions, and it does have some overhead on that. So this best practice here, testing report performance with multiple users, this came from a support case that I worked about 6 months ago, and had a customer that was, saying they were having some performance issues with a report, and they were happy to send it to me to test out on my side. And when I imported it in, I found that the report ran quickly, and I was, really surprised to see I wasn't seeing the same kind of performance issue that they were. And that was mainly because I, brought up a test machine, and I only really had my administrator group and the everyone group, and I didn't have a ton of users. I didn't have any security defined. I basically just used the administrator account to view his report, and it ran quickly. And so, going back, I said, hey, can you test with your administrator's account? And he said, well, I don't have access, but let me try. And he got access, and sure enough, it ran just as quick as it did on my system. And so drilling in on that, we found that the users that he would generally use to view these reports were part of many groups and many subgroups, and the security was really complex behind the scenes. And it was quite obvious in the logs when we jumped to the logging level that a lot of the processing time was actually spent on figuring out writes and stuff behind the scenes. So, the customer took that away and said, oh, wow, well, maybe we can simplify this, and went in and simplified it slightly anyways. And from a coding perspective, I sent it through to development and said, is there anything we can do to optimize this? And they were able to find some ways to optimize that from a code level as well. So, really this customer saved, lots of time overall just by, applying a patch and reducing their security complexity. So really the point here though is, test it with all your users, and maybe benchmark with the admin, built-in administrator account, and, test it with different groups of users to see, is this going to be acceptable at the end for the target market? So factorizing variables whenever possible. So this is really, this is about not reinventing the wheel. Each time our report engine needs to calculate, or evaluate a formula and produce a result, it does have an impact. So here, this is really about, designing variables in such a way that you can reuse them within other variables, so that, we're only having to do the work once instead of duplicating effort. So in this example here, real simple example, I have two variables, one that calculates the total sales for the first half of the year, and one that calculates the total sales for the second half of the year. And so one of the requirements here is to get my full end of year sales. Well, I can just use, create a variable that just combines those two variables to get me that total, rather than doing a sum for all the year, right? Because behind the scenes, the engine would have already had to have calculated those other two variables anyways. So adding a third variable that calculated for the full year is just a waste of time. So really the point here is, if you can create your variables in such a way that you can reuse them within other variables, then it's much quicker for a calculation engine to, just say use the value from this variable, rather than, calculate this formula end result. This again was right from the developers saying, from a coding perspective, way more efficient to do it this way. All right. And on to best practices for sizing. So I think we're doing pretty good in time. Got about maybe 5 minutes left, and then we'll try to field some of these questions that are coming through. So, sizing best practices. So do not reuse your sizing from previous versions. So I noticed just from the polls coming in, a lot of people were already on 4.0 or 4.1. So really this is about, like, if you're upgrading from 3.1 or R2 or something like that, and you paid money to have a sizing done for you, or you spent the time to do a sizing in the previous version, do not try to reuse that sizing for 4.0. It's, for the most part, especially where Webi is concerned, it was designed from the ground up. It has 64-bit processing. There's a number of architectural changes, and these just really are, they're not going to apply to your previous sizing. So be sure that you redo your sizing. We do have a number of resources out there. We've got some sizing guides. We've got a resource usage estimator, Excel document. Or it's an Excelsius document, rather. And Ted Ueda, who's actually on the call here as well, I see he wrote a great blog here about revisiting the sizing, and he gives some really compelling reasons as to why. So please, consider doing this. You will definitely benefit from it. And another thing that's overlooked quite often, most people will size for day one, account for a piece of the future, and then maybe never look at it again. So please, set up every 6 to 9 months, make sure you do a sizing review, and you revisit the sizing, and you base that on, usage and expected future usage. So, or if you have the major change, such as, a new group of users comes on, or a bunch of content gets migrated, or, you see that you have a bunch of people out there that are designing, a massive amount of reports all of a sudden. So these types of things, really require you to do a resizing and make sure that your environment is not running into bottlenecks, or that your initial resource estimates aren't out of whack. And the best tool you can use to assist you with this is called the BI Platform Support Tool. And this is a tool developed by Support. Toby Johnson, he's very active on SCN. You guys have probably seen him around. Him and his team have been working on this tool for a couple of years now, and it has this thing called the Landscape Analysis Report that really gives you a great overview of your system as far as how many users, number of documents, schedules that have failed, allows you to do change analysis. Lots of great features in here, and it would really assist you for especially resizing efforts. So take a look at that. There's lots of info out there. That's his wiki. And probably the most important thing is make sure that you split your adaptive processing server correctly. So this was a huge thing from a support perspective when we first had 4.0 hit the ground, is these changes where we now use more of these services than we did in previous versions. And basically, the adaptive processing server is a Java container that has multiple services plugged into it. And you can deploy multiple adaptive processing servers and split out these services in such a way where you can, group like services, or maybe put a heavy service with a light service, and then find a good balance that'll give you that resources versus performance kind of thing. And we do have a great document out there that will help you split this out. It does take a bit of work to do, but the benefits, especially if you're seeing kind of some performance bottlenecks or some memory type issues, the benefits of this are amazing. So please make sure that you do spend some time splitting out your APS. And this is really around sizing is resource considerations. These are just a few little tips, stuff that I've run into on support cases that, just definitely need to be thought about. So network can be a bottleneck, especially if you have, a large amount of records being transferred from the database back to the processing server side. I've seen some customers, they've said, well, I just upgraded to HANA and it's supposed to be lightning quick, and I'm seeing, the reports are taking me longer. And I say, okay, where's your HANA system? Well, it's hosted over here in Germany, and our servers are in Calgary. And I said, well, yeah, so from the HANA side, it's producing a huge amount of records in 3 seconds. But now it has to transfer that huge amount of data across a wide area network to your processing server for processing. So network can become a bottleneck. Definitely an option. You want to make sure that your database and your processing servers are close in proximity, especially if you're dealing with slower networks. And same kind of goes with some network storage. If you're using network storage, things like cache and temp space generally don't need to be on network storage and can become bottlenecks, especially because things like cache and temp are heavily used. So if you have lots of servers all trying to write to a network drive, your network can actually become an issue. So quite often, just using cheap local disk for things like the Webi processing server cache folders and storage folders, that's good enough, right? It's not critical stuff. If it goes away, we just simply regenerate cache and temp. So, not critical, but I've seen that become a bottleneck as far as I/O goes too. And CPU speed versus number. This can definitely be a factor. I had one customer that had a 32 CPU box, and they were seeing some huge performance issues. Again, internally, I tried to reproduce. I couldn't do it. What it ended up being after a month or two of working was they were using a really old Solaris box that had like 1.8 gigahertz clock speed. All my testing was done on a 4 CPU, 3.2 gigahertz processor, and I was getting 3 times the speed. I found an older box, tested it out. I was able to reproduce their issue with the slower CPUs. So number of CPUs doesn't necessarily matter. It means, can run more things concurrently, but not as fast. So Process Explorer is a tool I use all the time that helps me monitor resources on a Windows box. So definitely, if you guys haven't played around with Process Explorer, it's a free tool from Microsoft, and it gives you some great live information about your system. I'm happy to maybe see what questions we can answer here now. Yeah, so it is being considered for 4.2. I don't know, if that's out there yet, but it's being considered. Obviously, we can't promise that it's going to make it to market, but it is definitely on the radar. The reason it hasn't been done to date, the reasons I've been given, is because it does mean like a huge overhaul and some overhead as to how we currently do things. It means a lot of testing. It means a lot of things. So really, it's a matter of, if they can get it done, then great. So they are working to do that from a product development perspective right now, and it's clear that people want that and that we could benefit from it if done properly. So yeah, it's being considered. We'll know soon enough, in the coming months here as 4.2 progresses, whether or not it's going to make it into the product. So I'd have to look it up. I mean, I've dealt with a couple of cases on that, and most customers were able to still utilize it if they didn't hard code the server name in, if they use relative paths for the open document, right? Because generally, if you're using QIDs when you're migrating, the QIDs remain the same. So as long as you're not hard coding the server name, you're using like, I don't know, I forget the syntax. I think it's like // open document. I'd have to dig up the URL, but yeah, there are ways to use relative paths in your open document linking so that it doesn't, it's not bound to the application server from a previous environment. And so it does take a little bit more work to set up that way, but it can definitely work. I think we have some posts out there on that. You can try and dig up. So yeah, out of the box, the reasons we got from development on that, and believe me, we from a support perspective, worked hard to get this changed. But out of the box, the requirement is to have a simple to install product that is that you can demo or essentially use right out of the box, right? From a developer's or product perspective, we expect that customers are going to do a sizing exercise anyways, because no matter what we provide out of the box, it's going to require tuning and configuration to really have it, fit business needs of a live customer. So they decided it was better to have something that was, easy to install and ready to go for demo purposes versus, having something that, had 30 services out of the bat and stuff. So where we kind of came to a compromise later on is we provided a configuration wizard that pops up in the CMC that will split out the APS for you the first time you log in. With just asking you some simple questions and having you fill in a few details, it will do its best to kind of get you started with a split out. So I think that came out in SP2. 4.1 SP2 now has that configuration wizard. Might be SP3, I forget exactly, but we will guide you through it now out of the box, whereas original versions didn't have that.